Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to Backyard Beekeeping for Beginners. My name is Janet Lewis, and I am with Rustic Root Sanctuary. I've been beekeeping for 2.5 years now, and this year at Rustic Roots, we did our first bee mentorship. And so a lot of the pictures that you'll see came out of that program, and we'll just go over basic beekeeping stuff. Welcome to Backyard Beekeeping for Beginners. As I was saying, the photos and videos are taken at Rustic Roots Sanctuary, and it includes some of our first-year beekeeping mentor or mentees. The mentorship was sponsored by Solidarity Economy STL, and we hope to be doing it again, maybe in more of a collaboration format next year. So, do you want to keep bees? Some of the first things to think about when deciding to keep bees is where you're going to place them. You don't want them to be in a highly trafficked area. You also want to make sure you have a stand, so the placement for the brood box is a little bit off the ground so that you're not bending over and ergonomically incorrect as you work your hives. You also want to put down a weed barrier. I've learned this the hard way. Every year I say I'm going to do it, but we have yet to completely block the weeds around the hive. And it gets really tricky in the summertime when your weeds are growing and your bees are busy and it's super hot to put on a suit and go out and weed as well. So I just want, if you are planning to get your own hive, make sure you put down some sort of weed barrier so that you don't have to deal with it ongoing as you're checking your hives through the summer. Most people recommend starting with 2 hives to be able to share the resources between the hives. Like if one is moving slowly or it doesn't have a lot of brood, then you can take brood from another hive and kind of give those weak bees a boost. So they always say to start with 2 hives. I only started with 1. We actually got our first hive when a neighbor caught a swarm and just didn't want to deal with getting the box and all that stuff. So she came over with a swarm in a cardboard box. And from there, that's how we got started beekeeping. There are a lot of different resources for you guys to tap into out there, like beekeeping associations, Isabees. You can always look into friends or neighbors that keep bees, and then Rustic Root Sanctuary. We do have an apiary with 8 hives, and so if you ever want to come and sneak a peek inside the hive, this would be kind of a good way to suit up and work with the bees a little bit before you get your own hive. So what you'll need to get started, you're going to need a bee box or a hive, and they could be vertical or horizontal. For the purposes of this class, we'll be working with the Langstroth hive. I hear horizontal hives are amazing, but I personally have never worked with them. I do think that the advantage to working with horizontal hives is you wouldn't have to lift the whole box every time you're working with the bees. Because it's horizontal, you just lift a little top bar and then the frames are right underneath that. So I think it would make the bee inspections a lot easier. But like I said, I've never worked with them. I'm not quite sure how complicated it is to get started working horizontal hives. So next, let's dissect the parts of the hive. So these are the parts of your bee box, and on the top you'll have an outer cover, and that is usually covered with this little piece of metal you see up here. That is to keep them rain tight. The metal is very important to always make sure it's on, because water is no good for bees. And you also want a heavy stone or a brick to put on top of that metal to keep it weighed down and in place. Underneath the outer cover, there'll be this inner cover, which is the second block down. And as you can see, there's a little hole in the center so the bees can kind of move through. There's usually a little groove in the back of it. And the general rule is the groove goes towards the back in the summer, so there can be cross ventilation through the entire hive. And then in the winter, you want to turn it so that the groove is towards the front. and that tends to keep the bees warmer. And you'll also use a little wooden piece that you can see pictured on top of the bottom board down here. It's an entrance reducer. Okay, underneath that, you're gonna have a medium super, and basically that's what that box is called. It's also referred to as a honey super, and that is where you'll pull your honey when the bees are doing their good work and bringing in a lot of nectar in the summertime when there's a good flow going on. This little thing underneath the super is called a queen excluder. It's actually like it looks like a grill or a grate, and the slats on it are big enough to let the worker bees travel up and down the hive, but they're small enough so that the queen cannot get through. She's got a heftier abdomen than the other bees, so she won't be able to move up into the honey super, and that kind of ensures she doesn't go up there. Now, I have done a couple of experiments with queen excluders, and I found that in the early spring, it's better for me to have the queen be able to move throughout the hive. For some reason, they tend to build up their honey a lot faster that way. And when we've put a queen excluder on before and checked 2 weeks later, it was kind of like nothing was going on up there. So we ended up taking the excluder out and letting her move around. Now, there are other reasons I like to use a queen excluder, and that's once your hive is strong and established, you can definitely pop that excluder on to make sure no brood is being laid in your honey super, and it's only honey that's being produced up there. Underneath the queen excluder, you will find the hive body or the brood chamber. It's also referred to as a deep super. You could call it what you want, but this is basically the brood chamber where the queen lays her eggs. And underneath that, you will see the bottom board. Typically, there's a screen under here also for ventilation reasons. And this picture isn't showing it, but there's oftentimes screened bottom boards so that they can get ventilation in the summertime. And that's basically the base of your hive. And that little piece of wood towards the front of the entrance is called the entrance reducer. And as I was saying earlier, in the winter, you'll put the entrance reducer inside the entrance, and that will cut down the flow of air through your hive. Now, there is one other thing that's not pictured here, and it's basically a piece of cork board or foam board, and that slips in so that it blocks more of the air from going through if you have that screened bottom board. So just know that when you see that little corrugated board, that is basically for you to slip in over the screen board so that you can cut down on the airflow in the wintertime when you're overwintering your hive. Here are some of the additional items you're going to need. This is just a package on Amazon. I forgot what it was going for, but I think anywhere from $175 to $200, you can pick up a starter set. In this particular starter set, you'll see hive tools, and there's a bee suit and gloves that come with it. This particular picture is only showing the veil, but you definitely want a full body bee suit if you're just beginning, because the bees can get a little testy when you take their honey. And you want to have extra frames always, because anytime your frames get all built up or you're pulling honey out, you want to make sure you have extra frames to go back in the place of any frames that you're pulling out. You want to have a smoker. That's the shiny can looking thing. It's got a bellow on it so that you can keep your smoke going. And you want to have smoker fuel. There's also a frame holder. This one pictured has wooden handles, and you can basically just grab the frame and pull it up once you've unstuck it with the hive tool. You'll want a bee brush for when you're pulling honey and you want to take all the bees off the frame. You can just brush them and smoke them, and or just shake them down into the box. And you guys are gonna see all of this because I'm actually gonna do a live rolling film of a hive inspection. Aside from the bee brush, you're going to want a queen cage, and that's the little orange or the little yellow thing you see up there by the gloves. It's got a little sponge on it and kind of like a plunger so that you can move your queen to the top of the queen cage and actually mark her abdomen if you want to mark your queen. We like marking our queens here because that way we can always find them quicker. So now that we've talked about what you need to get started, you're probably wondering, where do you get your starter bees? Well, you can either order a package or a nuke. And the only difference is, well, some of the differences are a package is about 3 pounds or 10,000 bees. The queen is not necessarily related to the bees, and there may be an issue with the rest of the worker bees accepting the queen. The queen will come in a little queen cage with a cork or a sugar plug. You can remove that plug or cut it back when you release her into your hive at home. The bees will have to start building from scratch, which will lengthen the time it takes to get them established. If you get a package, you'll want to feed them 1-to-1 sugar water to make sure the hive is stronger and builds faster. I recommend purchasing a nuke, although I have never done this myself, but if I had to buy a package or a nuke, I would go with the nuke, because a nuke typically comes with 4 frames, 2 honey frames and 2 brood frames. In a nuke, all the bees are related. You get a 2-week head start on honey production. And with the nuke, you simply move the frames into the center of your brood box, and the transition is much less stressful for the bees, and the bees already love and are bonded with their queen, so you don't have to worry about them rejecting or killing her. Hive inspections. So we want to not overdo hive inspections. You'll get your bees testy and you can set them back a little bit when you go into the hive a lot. So it's recommended every 7 to 10 days when you've got a new hive, just to make sure everything's going well inside. And when your hives are established, you can go every 2 weeks to monthly inspections. The temperature should be over 60 degrees. The weather should be mild, not too windy, rainy, or too hot. Water in the hive is never a good thing. It actually kills bees a lot. That's why I said always put a block or a heavy rock on top of your outer cover. Okay, lighting your smoker. This is a good thing to master right up front. And I always like to have dried out materials on hand. You're going to load your smoker from the bottom up. So you'll basically take your fuel, which could be pine cones, dried grass, crumpled newspaper, tissue, cardboard. You'll light it and loosely add it, and then bellow the smoker till it catches. Then you'll want to push the material down with your hive tool, add a little more loose material, bellow, and repeat. And you're going to keep doing that until you're relatively full. And once you have a nice fire lit, you can add either old torn jeans, burlap, or dried grass to create big, cool smoke. And right now, my favorite is probably dried grass or old jeans, because I always have jeans that need to go to the thrift store, so I'll just cut them up and use that as fuel. Just don't seem to need pine cones. I use all the time. The pellets, not so much, just because I don't have time to constantly go and get a supply. So why don't you explain what you're doing, Sandy?
So one of the easy ways to do that is to use these pellets. They're just compressed wood, and you light them, and they are really good when you've got wet conditions because they will light. And things that you have, you're recycling into that smoker. Pine cones, some people use cut up blue jeans, some people use cardboard, but the point is that you want your smoke to be long lasting and cool, because you don't want to harm your little bees. And the big thing is keep Keep that bellows going until everything's lit. And this is not ready to go. This is just getting a good foundation there, okay? Some people believe in using smoke a lot. Some people believe that the less smoke, the better. Some beekeepers use bee spray, just honey, not honey, sugar and water. So there's different ways to do it. Some of us just sing to our bees and hope they're gonna be happy. But it's always good to have a smoker. And if you have a friend that can be assigned the smoker like me, that will be my job. To keep that bellows going. If you're gonna practice something, practice working at perfecting getting your smoker going. And these are easily purchased, but you can also recycle things like blue jeans, egg cartons.
And that's it. It's going pretty good, so you can cut. Okay, so when you first lift the outer cover, you're going to puff some smoke in and put the cover back down. This just lets them kind of settle down and lets them know what's going on. After a few, like a minute or two, you can take the cover off. Then you take the inner cover off. I usually place both the inner and the outer cover near the entrance of the hive so the bees can go back in easily. You'll continue to smoke the bees. And the reason we smoke bees is because smoke masks the bee pheromones, that sense of smell. And basically there's a intruder or alarm pheromone that the bees send off once you come into the hive. And with the smoke, there's less of a transmittal of that pheromone. Smoke actually fools the bees into thinking there's a forest fire, so they essentially go get drunk on honey, which calms them down. And then they're also, they gorge their bellies, so it makes them slower and less likely to sting you. But always be careful where you set your smoker because the bottom gets extremely hot. So now you're ready to pull a frame out of your super and inspect it. What are you looking for? Well, can you see the queen? It's a good practice to get used to spotting the queen because if you see her early on in your inspection and can tuck her away somewhere safely in a queen cage, or if you're planning to mark her one of those marker cages, then you can ensure she doesn't get damaged during your inspection. You want to carefully lift and inspect each frame for her. And you just want to make extra sure you don't lose or kill the queen accidentally. If you mark her, she's really easy to spot, and so that's what we do. Here she is. So this is a beautiful queen, and as you can see, she's got this lovely caramel covered extended abdomen. Her abdomen is much bigger than the others, which keeps her from getting through the queen excluder or the little slats on the top of the queen cage. And she is basically the brain of the entire hive. So that is our queen there. Okay, and here is that marker queen catcher I was talking about. All right, so in this particular picture, we had just caught a queen that in a cage that came in a package one of our mentees ordered. We slipped the queen in and placed it on the frame so the bees would stay calm, smelling her pheromone. This ensures she's safe while you inspect the rest of the hive. You can release her into the box you want her to go in, and if you want to add a queen excluder, you just add that over the box you release your queen into, and that way you know she's not going to travel up. Bee behavior. Here you can see a cluster of worker bees surrounding the queen. They're basically trying to get at her and get her out of there so she can go back to work. As long as she's on the box, the bees remain fairly calm. Inspect the frames. As you pull the frames, you are looking for honey, brood, and larva. The honey is usually on the outer frames, and the brood is typically toward the center. You always want to make sure you have at least 2 to 3 empty frames on the end. If bees get overcrowded in the spring, they will likely swarm. Brood and honey. This is a great picture of a frame. Across the top, you're seeing capped honey. In the center, you're seeing capped brood. Everything else is just bees and perfectly built honeycomb. But this is basically what a frame looks like. And this is a frame of fresh capped honey. You can tell this was a brand new frame that was just put in because all of the honeycomb is super light, as is all of the cappings. And this was very, very early spring. If you have an extractor, you can spin the honey out right away. It's a good practice to give the spun frame back to the bees so they don't have to start building all over from scratch. You give them a head start if it still has comb built on the frame. And this is what a swarm looks like. So if you ever go outside and you just see like a massive cloud of bees just all over the sky, your bees are probably swarming. And in this case, that's exactly what they're doing. They are taking flight because they've run out of room in their hive. And I think we just couldn't keep up with the pace. Our bees kind of exploded this summer. We went from having 3 hives to 8 hives doing splits and catching a swarm. So this was luckily one of the swarms we successfully caught. And the really good news about this swarm is they decided to land on a blackberry plant that was probably 15 feet away from the original hive. And they just did their little beard cluster on this blackberry branch, which ended up hitting the ground once it got really heavy. So it was super easy just to take this branch, lift it over a super, and shake the bees down into it. And that's exactly how we caught this swarm. So swarming can be a little bit nerve-wracking. And if you want to catch a swarm that's like in a tree, I recommend you get a little more experience before you try that. It can be tricky and it's probably more of an advanced beekeeping thing. But there is another way to catch a swarm, and that is if you have a swarm trap somewhere on your property. You can add a Q-tip with lemongrass on it. And if you have built out frames, that's a good lure too. Sometimes the swarm will move in all on its own and you'll just wake up one day and there they are. They're living in your swarm trap. And then from there, you would just transition them over into a real hive. If you can't catch them, don't worry, because usually it's only half of your bees that took off and left the hive. And here we are in the middle of inspection, checking out a frame, and you can see the bees flying around. It's just an amazing experience working with the bees like this. And here's one of our bee mentees. I couldn't believe it. She had a bee and honeycomb tattoo. It was just meant to be. So the bee products that I want to share with you are, of course, honey. That's probably the #1 reason people want to keep bees, is so that they can have this great, wonderful source of food, honey. I like to render my beeswax. I use the beeswax that I've rendered and is nice and clean in candles. You can make a do-it-yourself furniture polish with just, I think it's olive oil and beeswax, but it could probably be any oil and beeswax. And then you can basically just Google search anything with do-it-yourself behind it and find endless recipes for uses for beeswax. And these are basically the stages of beeswax rendering. Here in the pot, you'll see we have mixed the wax with water. We're melting it down. And once it's all melted and kind of stirred up, we set it out away from the flame or the heat, and it solidifies. Once it solidifies, you can basically dump that solid wax out, and the water behind it will push the wax puck out. And from there, you can take that wax puck, melt it down in a double boiler configuration like the one you're seeing here on the left of your screen. And if you pour it through a stocking, then you will get the cleanest wax you can possibly get. Like I usually do, once I've got it rendered to the point in the upper right-hand corner, you can still see there's a little bit of debris. It's a little dirty still. I'll melt it down again, and then I'll just pour it through a pantyhose, a stocking, and that basically filters out most of the impurities so that you get what you're looking at in the bottom right-hand corner, that gold bar of beeswax in the end, which this is great. That's ready to go and be used in any of the products you typically, use beeswax for. You can basically just pour that straight over a wick, and that's a beeswax candle. And that's just a closer look of how fine that beeswax came out. And here are my bee mentees this year, and that video, so all of those pictures wouldn't have been possible without them. When you're beekeeping, it is tricky to think about recording and taking pictures while you're in the middle of working with your bees. So thanks to these wonderful ladies, we all got to have some really cool pictures to share. And next year, we're hoping to do an advanced beekeeping class where I've got my fingers crossed they all come back and take it to the next level and help me with our new bee mentees that are going to be coming in. But we're also looking to grow our apiary to 16 hives next year. So Rustic Root Sanctuary will have your honey. And now we're going to end with a few more clips of bee inspections. About to release the queen. And she has been marked. Ooh, actually, is it on her back? She has been marked, and now I'm gonna open this up for her. And there she goes. Hope you guys saw that. Thanks so much for watching. Again, I'm Janet Lewis. I run Rustic Root Sanctuary 501c3. I'm the executive director. You can find our website at rusticrootsanctuary.org. And the resources I'm going to send to Slow Food STL, so you'll be able to get sheets from them, and it'll basically link to some videos. It'll tell you about a couple Netflix films you can watch that'll give you some more perspective on bees and honey. And then it's also got links to all the beekeepers associations, and I've actually got a couple PDFs for you too. So thank you so much for your time and attention. Y'all have a wonderful night. And if you have any questions, just let me know.